So this little story starts with this guy. He was a bit of a smarty pants. His name was Herman Hollerith. He was born in 1860, got his degree in engineering, and he went off to work in the US Census Bureau in 1879. I have to have my notes because I can't remember the dates. So at that time, the US Census was really just a head count. They ran it once every 10 years. And in the late 1800s, when he joined, they were getting to the point where it was taking almost 10 years for them to be able to calculate that data. Of course, these days we call that overwhelming technical debt, right? The idea is they were worried that it was going to take longer and the next census would have to start before they'd finished counting the last one. So young Master Hollerith, like I said, a bit of a smarty pants, and he says, and I quote, "There ought to be a machine for doing the purely mechanical work of tabulating." So he built one. By 1884, he had a prototype, and the US Census Bureau used the machines for the 1890 census. This is the machine we can see here. So there's two parts to it. Well, there's actually three. I don't know if this will work. Here we go. So this is the pantograph, this bit. This is how they actually punched the holes in the cards. Then the card would get loaded in up here into this bit. Pins would drop down, and where the pins dropped through a hole, they dropped into a little thing of mercury. So that completed the circuit, and one of these dials up the top would increment by one. So then the human operator would note down on paper what the dials were telling them. They would then unload the card and pop it down here. You can only just see it. Pop it down here into what they call the sorter. It's basically just a table with a whole bunch of holes in it for cardboard. So I am told by the US Census History website that operators could process 80 cards a minute doing this, which I think is insane. Okay, so because Hollerith was a smarty pants, he didn't sell the machines to the government for the census, he leased them. And this was really clever because the census only ran once every 10 years and he wanted some income in between times. So he leased them to other government departments and large companies and that kind of thing. He created a company to manage this and he called it creatively the Hollerith Electric Tabulating System. They were really big on the big names. So over the next few years, Hollerith's company found other companies that were making similar machines and they were doing employee punch clocks and waiting systems and that kind of thing. And they merged into a partnership, which they called the Computing Tabulating Recording Company. That company then became International Business Machines in 1924. And finally, they all merged in 1933 and became the IBM that we know today. Anyway, I have got a whole nother talk on IBM corporate history, which I will not bore you with. Suffice to say, it's fascinating. Feel free to read it. The short version, Thomas J. Watson, he of Watson fame, the intelligence engine that they use now, he became IBM chairman in a ridiculously dodgy deal in 1914, beginning of the First World War. He was still in jail at the time for fraud. And he remained the chairman. He didn't remain in jail, but he remained chairman of IBM until 1956 when he died. So he was chairman of IBM through the two world wars. This guy was so dodgy, he didn't like writing things down. And I mention that only because it becomes relevant later in the story. So these are some early IBM machines. They were made by the German IBM subsidiary called Dynamite, which is the Deutsche Hollerith Machine Company, and I'm sure my German colleagues will probably hassle me about my pronunciation. So these machines are the Dynamite Hollerith D11. We've got the tabulator up here and the sorter. So that wooden cabinet we saw before, this has now become an electronic sorter. They're originally used mostly in banks. They were processing account transactions, calculating compounding interest, that kind of thing. So they're really very useful. And also they could cross-reference bank accounts to things like census data. I will remind you that we're in Germany. I will remind you that this is in about 1935. You know when you see pictures of people who have been in the concentration camps, and they have a number tattooed on their arm. That number connected the human being to the punch card for this machine. I'll give you a fact. In Holland, before the war, they had extensive Hollerith machine infrastructure. They had lots of machines and they're very well organised. By the end of the war, 73% of Dutch Jews had been killed. In France, they had very little Hollerith infrastructure. There was actually a competing company at the time. So the Hollerith infrastructure that they had was quite tiny. What they did have was very disorganised. By the end of the war, only 25% of French Jews were killed. In short, without this technology, the Holocaust would still have happened. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it would not have been quite so well organised. So I'm sure you all know about the Nuremberg trials that happened after the war ended. We know about them mostly for the Nazis that got sentenced for war crimes. What I didn't realise anyway, maybe it was just that my education was lacking, was that there were actually 12 more trials. They ran between 1946 and 1949, and they covered 177 people. People like physicians and judges, military personnel, but it also covered industrialists. People like this guy, Gustav Krupp. He provided panzer tanks. So here's Gustav here shaking hands with Hitler. This is a panzer tank from the Second World War. He was convicted. He went through there was a bit of confusion over him and his son. Another interesting story if you care to look it up. Interestingly, it didn't slow the Krupp manufacturing company down much. You probably know them as ThyssenKrupp now, and they make escalators and things. I get a little weirded out every time I get into a ThyssenKrupp elevator now. Anyway, so because people like ThyssenKrupp went up before the Nuremberg trials, you would expect that people like Watson from IBM would have also been up before the Nuremberg trials, but joke's on us. The Nuremberg trials were really very unique. It was the very first time something like this had happened, and it needed to happen in many languages simultaneously. The Nuremberg trials needed 4 languages, and they had so many trials to get through, they needed to do it as quickly as possible. Would anyone like to guess who provided the computing power for that to happen? So for completely unrelated reasons, I was in Nuremberg a couple of months ago. I did go through the documentation centre and the Nazi parade grounds. Interesting tour, took several hours, very moving. IBM was not mentioned once. Okay, so hopefully what you've picked up so far is that Hollerith was a very, very smart man. He solved a really, really difficult problem and made the world better through doing that. Where would we be if it wasn't for IBM infrastructure, right? It's not his fault that his work was used for such evil ends. It's not his fault that it was used in the Holocaust, it was used by Hitler. The point I want to make is that throughout history, technology has been invented for largely good purposes, but sometimes it gets used for bad ones. So I'd like to take a look at some more historical, what I call oh no moments. I will promise fewer Nazis in this next bit. Alfred Nobel, probably recognise his name. He was the guy who invented dynamite. He also had a large weapons manufacturing plant. So funny story, Alfred's brother died in Caen in France, and a French newspaper got confused and they wrote about the wrong brother. So they wrote an obituary for Alfred, and it was wonderful, I have to say, as a writer. I love it. The title was "The Merchant of Death is Dead," and it had this wonderful line in it. It said, "Dr. Alfred Nobel became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before." So Alfred read this, had what is technically known as an oh no moment, went on to completely secretly establish the Nobel Prize with his personal fortune, told no one, put it down in his will, and everyone got a lovely surprise when he actually died. Otto Hahn, he got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1944. It really should have been given to him. So this is Otto down here. It really should have been given to him and his 2 colleagues. So that's Lisa Meitner and Fritz Strassmann. I'm like, woman. Should have been given to all three of them. The other two had to leave Germany in a bit of a hurry a couple of years earlier. I promised fewer Nazis. Later on, of course, the nuclear fission was used to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The entire world had an oh no moment, and now we have ethics committees in chemistry. Eugenics, practice of sterilising portions of the population to stop them breeding. Hitler was obviously a fan, but I promised fewer Nazis. So we'll look at the US. 33 US states had sterilisation programs in place, largely against mentally ill people, disabled people, alcoholics, people living in poverty, and people deemed to be promiscuous, which as far as I can tell is mostly black women. Some reports say around 65,000 people Americans were legally sterilised during the first half of the 20th century. No one really knows. It was a bit of an oh no moment for biology. The World Health Organization, they were the first specialised agency of the UN, which I think speaks to how important they were to the world, especially at that time. I dug through some of the WHO charter to try and find a nice little soundbite for you. Couldn't find one, it's all rather stuffy language, so I've summarised it for you. Don't let your government kill you and tell you it's good for your health. Thalidomide, another great drug disaster. Made us feel like maybe better oversight on drugs was a good idea. It was sold over the counter from 1957. Unfortunately, the Germans are again implicated in this one. It was recommended to pregnant women for relieving the symptoms of morning sickness. Unfortunately, it also created horrific birth defects. Around 40% of children born with defects survived. Those who did survive had terrible limb losses and the rest. Court cases were brought against the manufacturer of thalidomide for many, many years. In fact, in Australia, we've only just settled a class action back in 2012, so it's been going on for a long time. Interestingly, the US Food and Drug Administration already existed before this, but it was thalidomide that really gave us the impetus to give them better powers and to really look after drug oversight. And we have a whole bunch of laws, including here in Australia, that basically strengthened our drugs oversight as a result of the thalidomide disaster. We didn't let too many bridges collapse before we decided that maybe civil engineering should have some oversight. And it only took one person flying a plane into a building to make us realise that maybe box cutters don't go on planes. So hopefully you see where I'm going here. People don't come up with new ideas because they're trying to hurt people, mostly, for the most part. It's the unintended consequences that cause problems. And it's those oh no moments that make us better as a society. We end up with better laws, we end up with better regulations. Those things don't stop bad things happening. Well, hopefully they do stop bad things happening in the future, but it does give us some kind of recourse, and it makes us better as a species, I think. So, Volkswagen was caught out having written software to cheat emissions testing. I'm sure you all remember that one, especially if you own a Volkswagen like I do. Uber also developed software. It was designed to cheat government officials trying to clamp down on ride sharing at the time. They called it Greyball. The difference here is that Volkswagen software engineers went to jail and Uber software engineers didn't. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to why? One's a car company and the other's a software company. Startups like to talk about, you know, the Facebook phrase of moving fast and breaking stuff. I'm sure we've all had that project manager who encourages us to think out of the box and think creative or whatever, all that stuff. Challenge paradigms. I'm not suggesting we should stop building new things, not for a moment. Please don't think that. All I'm wondering is what happens when we step back from what we've created and go, oh no. In my opinion, IBM should have had the world and IT should have had its oh no moment back when IBM made the Holocaust possible in the years after that. It did go unpunished and we've largely forgotten about it now. There's never been a public reckoning as a result of that. And so now we've looked at some examples of oh no moments through history that did create real change and really made the world better. Now I'd like to look at some IT innovations that haven't. I'll start small. The development of the web in the 90s was obviously amazing and optimistic and changed the world for the better for the most part. And I don't think anyone can be blamed for failing to see 4chan coming. I do think we can blame some of the social networks for failing to do anything about it. The white supremacism on Twitter. I am a prolific tweeter, for those who aren't aware. The white supremacism on Twitter it's at best horrifying, and at worst they've done nothing at all. Self-driving cars are a particularly thorny problem. On the one hand, there's huge benefits to the technology. It gets otherwise confined people out of the house. It has huge benefits on being able to mobility, on the environment, all sorts of things. There's great things to be had here. But we haven't fully thought through the impacts. Most of the accidents that are related to self-driving cars are basically because humans have become too reliant on the tech. They do stupid stuff like reading books or watching movies. The auto driving features really should be used as a safeguard. I wonder what happens when we rely on the tech so much that we cross the road without looking because we just know the cars will stop. I have self-driving features in my Volkswagen, and it's dumb. It's really dumb. It makes stupid decisions all the time. There are times I've been driving along quite happily on the highway with it doing its thing, and all of a sudden it goes brake and the lights start flashing, carrying on. Like there's nothing going on. They're dumb. They are not smart enough yet for us to be able to rely on them. Having said that, I don't think that the tech should be hidden away until it's perfect, because how else do you know that it's perfect? It's a really thorny problem, and I do think that there's going to be an oh no moment in this future, if there hasn't already been that I'm not aware of. Killer robots, I looked into this for a university assignment a few months ago. This particular situation was a South Korean university, so this KAIST, and they teamed up with this weapons manufacturer, Hanwha. Bit hard to find pictures of them. Obviously, the technology for killer robots, so what I'm talking about here is the autonomous drones that are able to drop bombs without human intervention, right? When the technology for this can be used for great things. Obviously, it's used in autonomous cars. It's used in air flight with autopilots. Medicine and surgery applications, if you'd believe it, even peacekeeping operations, because if you can drop a bomb, you can drop an aid package. In this case, so we had the South Korean university teamed up with this weapons manufacturer. The only thing that actually stopped that going ahead was an open letter from universities around the world, headed up by an Australian academic, actually, which I think we should all be very proud of. They sent an open letter and said, basically, we're going to stop sharing our research with you. We're not going to talk to you anymore. And that allegedly killed the research project. The thing is, though, we don't know. We don't know what's happening there now. The chancellor of the university wrote a lovely letter saying, oh, terribly sorry, we didn't mean to. But there's a huge amount of money in weapons manufacturing. And who's to say, I mean, I don't know, pure speculation, obviously, but who's to say that weapons manufacturers aren't waving large wads of cash at academics? Now, we don't know. There's a huge amount of money involved and there's zero oversight. Here's another one for you, and I could talk for hours about this, but I'll try not to. It was reported in The Economist a couple of months ago, if you can grab that online. It also got picked up on the ABC News recently, so I hope you might have seen it in the last couple of weeks. Xinjiang is a province in northwest China. It's largely occupied by the Uyghur people. They're the largest Muslim group in China. So obviously, they're a persecuted people, right? So Hotan is the capital of Xinjiang. This is what they call a convenience police station, believe it or not. There's a few of them every kilometre in the capital. And they're designed to have lounges in the bottom, places to charge your phone, that kind of thing. So you can just hang out at the police station. as you do. So there's checkpoints around the province, and as you move around the province, you move through these checkpoints, you get your fingerprints scanned, obviously, you get your irises scanned, you have to unlock your phone and pop it into a dock, and they download all the data. Isn't that exciting? Also, they have cameras dotted all around the city. Now, these cameras are not just security cameras like we see in every city here in Australia. They do pattern matching between, say, drivers and the license plate of the car. So if you're driving a car that is not yours, and especially if you're a Uyghur, guess what? You're going off to a concentration camp. I'm sorry, they're not called concentration camps, they're called re-education camps. China recently allowed cameras into one, and it was all very fun. It looked great. Obviously, locking people up because they're different is not new. We've been doing that for many decades. What I think is interesting here is the way technology is being put to use to do that. I bet the people who invented facial recognition have had several oh no moments over the years, and I reckon some of them have been because of China. Don't think it's just China though. You may have heard of Palantir. They do this Minority Report style stuff. You can't find photos of anything to do with Palantir, so I've got an actual Minority Report picture there for you. You're welcome. So this technology was originally developed by the Pentagon, and it was used to identify terrorists in Iraq. Now they've shipped it into downtown Los Angeles, where it gets used to lock up brown people, often before they commit a crime. So I don't think it's just China. It's happening here in the West as well. So while there's this increasing media awareness, and I think that's great. I don't know that Cambridge Analytica is what's going to get us over the line, but it's getting there, it's starting. Seeing the Uyghur on ABC was really quite heartening to me. It made it feel like it's getting into mainstream. We're talking about this stuff. So what does it all have to do with documentation? I told you I'd get there in the end. You might be aware that after quality assurance, the team that finds the most bugs is documentation, exactly. We are often put in the situation of having to poke at products that we don't fully understand. We have to come at them like a clueless newbie, if you will. Poke them, bend them, use them in ways they haven't been designed. I say we should expand that thinking a little bit. I would like you to ask, how can I use this product to do harm? How can I use this product to discover things about people I really shouldn't be discovering? And also, I'd like to think about the intersections with other technology. Recognising someone's face is one thing, but when you can combine that with GPS locations, government databases, purchase history, you have a completely different problem. You also have the answer to why I don't use supermarket loyalty cards anymore. I'll digress really quickly. I received a link a couple of weeks ago to confirming my hotel booking for a hotel I'd never heard of. So I clicked the link. I couldn't see the credit card number, fair enough. I could only see the last 4 digits. But I could have made this man's stay very pleasant. I could have given him an extra week in the hotel. I could have sent him up some spa services. I could have ordered him some lovely meals, maybe some very expensive champagne. All because someone mistyped their email in a form. If I can give you one piece of advice, it's not to listen to your marketing department's hype. Nuclear fission has saved millions of lives, right? It's helped cancer treatment. It's provided light and power to billions of people. It's made surgery and even our vegetables safer. That's what the marketing department wants you to hear. It's also made nuclear war an actual real possibility, and the marketing department's unlikely to mention it. So, question things, raise bugs, talk to your manager, bring it up in your development team meetings. Until software engineering has a real, honest to God, oh no moment, and we get an actual ethics board with actual legal teeth, it's going to come down to the tech writers, poking at things and working out where the problems are, asking questions and raising bugs. Thank you very much.